Today's lesson is Zimbabwe's wildlife threatened by climate change. Hi, everybody. I am Roger.
And I'm Mike.
And today we're traveling to Africa, and we're going to the country of Zimbabwe, which I believe is in southeast Africa. And it's landlocked, and they're having some problems with climate change there. And we also need to be concerned about Zimbabwe because they have lots of elephants there, and we're trying to save the elephants.
Yes, indeed. It is a very important country for safari travel as well. A lot of people go there and spend lots of money every year to see African animals living in the wild in many of the large, beautiful national parks that they have there in Zimbabwe. But that wildlife, like a lot of things in all corners of the world, is being threatened by climate change. And this also threatens the Zimbabwean economy because I said they get millions of dollars a year from all of these visitors who come in to see these animals. But if the animals aren't there, then the people won't come, then the money won't be spent, and things will be tough. So there's all sorts of different effects because of climate change in Zimbabwe. So let's check out our article and find out what is going on.
Zimbabwe's wildlife threatened by climate change. Zimbabwe's national parks are scrambling to find a solution following the deaths of dozens of elephants. The tragic losses are the result of severe droughts and heat waves brought on by climate change. Zimbabwe's rainy season has historically lasted from October to March. In recent years, however, the rainy season has grown progressively shorter, sometimes starting as late as December.
大家好，第一部分我们来介绍 scramble 这个动词，表示匆忙、急迫、争抢的做……但也可以是翻炒蛋等的意思。例如 Ken is scrambling to find a cheap flight to Japan so he can attend his friend's wedding. Ken 正忙着寻找飞往日本的便宜机票，以便参加他朋友的婚礼。或是 For her breakfast, Tiffany scrambled some eggs and toasted a bagel. Tiffany 早餐炒了蛋，还烤了一个贝果。接下来看到形容词 tragic， 它指的是不幸的、悲惨的或是悲剧性的。例如 Many passengers lost their lives in the tragic ferry accident. 许多乘客在那场惨烈的渡轮意外中丧失生命。或者 The story begins happily enough, but has a tragic ending. 那个故事开头相当欢乐，但结局悲惨。下一个介绍片语 bring on 名词，表示引起、造成或是导致。例如 When the star player scored a second goal, it brought on the loudest cheering of the night. 那位明星球员的2度射门得分，引来当晚最热烈的一阵欢呼。或是 Lack of sleep brings on Sophia's headaches. 睡眠不足导致 Sophia 头痛。再来介绍副词 progressively， 意思是逐渐的或是日益增加的。例如 From childhood to adulthood, my eyesight got progressively worse and worse. 从小到大，我的视力变得越来越差。再看一个例子 Audrey's health condition still became progressively worse even after her surgery. 即使是手术后 Audrey 的健康状况还是逐渐恶化。
Okay, so again, we've got wildlife in Zimbabwe, and that wildlife is threatened by climate change, sometimes referred to as global warming, although the term climate change is used way more often these days. Here in the first paragraph, it says, Zimbabwe's national parks are scrambling to find a solution following the deaths of dozens of elephants. So we've got the national parks in Zimbabwe, and they're scrambling to find an answer to this problem. If you scramble, that means you react quickly when there's a disaster or when there's a terrible situation that you need to face. So yes, they're trying to figure out a way to solve this problem quickly because they don't have enough time. If they wait too long, those elephants might go extinct.
Yes, and that would, of course, be terrible. The tragic losses of these elephants are the result of severe droughts and heat waves brought on by climate change. So these losses of these dozens of elephants are tragic. Something tragic is very sad. It's a tragedy. It's a disaster. It caused a lot of terrible effects and hit people in a lot of awful, terrible, sad ways. So if something is tragic, it's a great loss. It's a great sadness. And so these losses are the result of severe droughts. Droughts are basically periods of no rain or very little rain, much less than normal, much less than necessary. If we have droughts here in Taiwan, that means we probably don't have a lot of rains in the spring, the typhoons in the summer don't come, the water reservoirs and lakes dry up, and we all end up having to, not take showers on certain days of the week because they cut off the water. Those are the types of effects that droughts can have on our daily lives. And of course, heat waves can contribute to droughts when it's very hot, when the weather gets kind of crazy. In the summer, it goes up to 40 degrees or higher for a period of time. That could be a heat wave. So no rain and great heat, of course, leave very little water around for animals to drink. And this is all brought on or created or thanks to climate change. Yes, there it is, that great villain of our current modern age.
Right, it's causing lots of problems all over the world, but today we're focusing on the problem in Zimbabwe to serve as an example that we can study and learn from. And let's talk about this specifically. Zimbabwe's rainy season has historically lasted from October to March. So they have a rainy season there in Zimbabwe, like we have a rainy season here in Taiwan. Their rainy season, or the time of the year when it rains more than other times of the year, it has historically or in the past lasted from October to March. So in the fall to the spring, that's how long the rainy season was. That's about what, a period of 6 months or so? So that means they get plenty of rain if things are like they used to be.
That's right. In recent years, however, and again, thanks to climate change, in recent years, however, the rainy season has grown progressively shorter, sometimes starting as late as December. So instead of getting 6 months of rain, now they're getting 4 months of rain or something like that. And this has happened slowly or progressively over probably a few years or a few decades. If something happens progressively, it kind of changes and develops. It happens in a sort of steady way, but maybe not with, a lot of jumps or a lot of pauses or anything. It just sort of keeps going and keeps happening. And so as you grow in your teenage years, you will probably get progressively taller. If you continue to study, you will get progressively more intelligent or progressively know more about a certain topic. In the same way that if you practice an instrument or practice a sport, you will get progressively better at it. Hopefully, there will be a steady change, there will be a steady development or growth. So this has happened, and it's been happening for a while, and now it's really starting to bite. It's really starting to cause some pretty bad effects.
Right, so it's starting later and later, and it probably ends earlier and earlier, so they have a shorter rainy season, and that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson for today. Let's now listen to the second part.
Erratic weather patterns have left Zimbabwe's wildlife without enough resources, forcing animals to travel long distances for food and water. Reports of clashes between humans and wildlife have skyrocketed as lions, hyenas, and other animals have wandered into villages in search of food. The nation's elephants have been particularly impacted by the droughts. A 2020 report identified drought as a driving force behind a bacterial infection that killed 35 elephants that year. More recently, the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority said that the parks have only enough food and water to support about half of the country's roughly 100,000 elephants.
第二部分介绍 erratic 这个形容词，意思是不稳定的、不规律的或是飘忽不定的。举例来说 The scientists were puzzled over the erratic results of their experiment. 科学家们对实验结果的不稳定性感到困惑。也可以说 The police officer pulled Wendy over because of her erratic driving. 因为温迪驾车行径怪异，警察要他靠边停车。接着我们看到单字 clash， 它是名词，指的是冲突、打斗、分歧或是争论。可以说 Protesters had a violent clash with police and many of them were injured. 抗议人士与警察发生暴力冲突，其中有不少人受伤。又或者说 Brad and Harrison will never work together because they have a clash of opinions. Brad 和 Harrison 不会一起合作的，因为他们的观点不同。最后是 skyrocket， 这个动词的意思是暴涨、飙涨或是剧增。例如 The price of vegetables skyrocketed after the storm. 暴风雨过后，蔬菜价格暴涨。
Okay, let's continue to talk about what's happening in Zimbabwe in terms of climate change. Erratic weather patterns have left Zimbabwe's wildlife without enough resources, forcing animals to travel long distances for food and water. So we've got these erratic weather patterns. If something's erratic, it isn't stable. You can't really predict it. You never know what's going to happen. It's not regular in movement or in patterns. It's unpredictable. You might have erratic breathing, for example, if you've had some kind of problem like a heart attack or something like that, or you might have an erratic heartbeat, which I've had before in the past. I needed to take medication for that. And in this case, we've got erratic weather patterns, and this has resulted in the wildlife there not having enough resources. And when they don't have those resources like food and water, they need to travel long distances for those things.
Yeah, of course, that definitely strain communities of animals. And there have been reports of clashes between humans and wildlife have skyrocketed as lions, hyenas, and other animals have wandered into villages in search of food. Oh, wow. You can imagine having a lion or hyena or elephant wandering around a village would definitely lead to clashes between the humans and the animals. A clash is a conflict of some kind. Peace is broken, harmony is disturbed, and there is some kind of conflict, some kind of argument. It could be like a person gets attacked by an animal or they have to kill an animal, or it could be elephants wandering into farm areas, stepping on the fences, crushing the crops under their feet. It's just where the peace and the harmony and the sort of ability for these animals and humans to live alongside each other gets broken by some kind of clash or conflict or fight, possibly even. And these types of situations or scenarios have grown rapidly or skyrocketed in recent years. As a rocket shoots into the sky, when we say something skyrockets, it grows very quickly by a very large amount. If you suddenly develop the most popular app in the world, your personal wealth will skyrocket. You will become much, much richer very, very quickly. So these types of clashes have grown, are happening more and more in the last few years compared to what they did before. And these animals are just looking for food. They're wandering into villages in search of or looking for food. I mean, you can't blame them. They're doing what it comes natural, but it does lead to clashes and conflicts and possibly even injuries between the animals and the humans.
Now, here in the next paragraph, it says, the nation's elephants have been particularly impacted by the droughts. So we're talking about problems with wildlife there, and let's focus specifically on elephants. They have really been affected or impacted by those droughts or those periods of no rain.
A 2020 report identified drought as a driving force behind a bacterial infection that killed 35 elephants that year. So it's not just the fact that they can't find water or they're coming into clashes with local people and farmers. There are also other health effects of this drought, this lack of water. This 2020 report from a few years ago identified or pointed out drought. It basically made drought the suspect or the reason why. It's the driving force behind a bacterial infection that killed 35 elephants. So the drought is why these animals are getting sick with a bacterial infection. Bacteria, of course, is a small living organism that can get into our body and make us sick. In that case, we've been infected. That has been an infection. This is the reason why you would wash your hands, is to avoid bacterial infection. The reason why you would clean a cut if you cut yourself, especially if you're outside and dirt might get in. That dirt might contain bacteria. and if that gets into your body, it can make you sick. It can cause a bacterial infection. So this drought, this lack of rain, is a driving force, one of the main reasons behind this bacterial infection that killed 35 elephants. So that's interesting. It's not just elephants are dying because they're thirsty, because they can't find water. They're also getting sick because of the drought. It's giving them other health problems like these infections. And then more recently, it said something else happened, right?
Yep, it says more recently, the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority said that the parks have only enough food and water to support about half of the country's roughly 100,000 elephants.
Wow.
So this is a department of the government in Zimbabwe, the Parks and Wildlife Management Authority. They have done some research and they've concluded that they only have enough food and water to support about half of the elephants that live in the country. That is pretty tragic. If something isn't done, half of those elephants are going to starve or they're going to die of thirst, and that would be terrible for the world's zoos. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's listen now to the third and final part.
National parks across the country have built solar-powered boreholes to pump water from underground reservoirs, though that will not provide enough water to support their wildlife. Animals will be forced to migrate farther and farther to survive, as the drought is expected to continue well into this year.
Okay, so again, we're in Zimbabwe, and like other countries in Africa, Zimbabwe is huge, and it's got lots of national parks. So national parks across the country have built solar-powered boreholes to pump water from underground reservoirs, though that will not provide enough water to support their wildlife. So they're trying to do something about this problem. They need to get some water from somewhere, so they've built these solar-powered boreholes. Okay, solar means having to do with the sun. We often talk about solar power, for example. Many of the signs in Taiwan are solar-powered. You can see little panels above them, so they get energy from the sun so that they can light up at night. And in this case, we're talking about solar-powered boreholes. They're looking for underground water, water from underground. A borehole is just a small hole that's dug into the ground in order to get something out of it, like water or oil.
Exactly. And a reservoir was somewhere where you have a large amount of water there to be used if you need it. Lakes can be reservoirs. If we build a dam, we'll often have a big lake created behind the dam where water builds up. It turns into basically a man-made lake. That can be a reservoir. And also deep underground, we can have reservoirs of water, rainwater that sort of trickles through the dirt, through the surface and the rocks of the earth. It sinks down to areas where there are kind of large underground caves. These caves can be filled with water, and that can also be a place where we keep water in reserve, or water can be found in reserve, kept back so that we can use it in other ways, a reservoir. So basically, they're building electric-powered pumps with these sort of deep wells that they're tapping this water that is underground because, of course, the water that normally falls from the sky is not falling from the sky. Though it says, however, that will not provide enough water to support their wildlife. Clearly, losing 33% of their normal rainwater that happens during the rainy season, we cannot really make up for that much water by pumping water from underground. It's going to help, but it won't be enough for all the animals. It says animals will be forced to migrate farther and farther to survive as the drought is expected to continue well into this year. The animals probably won't just stay there and say, oh, well, we have to die. No, they're going to try to find water because they are intelligent beings, and that will mean traveling. They're going to have to walk. They're going to have to leave Zimbabwe possibly. Go south, go north, go west, go somewhere where there's more rain. When you migrate, you're traveling in order to better your life in some kind of way, in the same way that birds migrate north to south as the weather gets colder, and then they migrate back north during the summer. These animals will migrate in order to find water. And of course, that will be bad for the Zimbabwe tourism business because the animals that visitors from around the world travel travel to see won't be there anymore. They're off in another country getting a drink of water.
Indeed, and of course, this is a problem with animals, but let's not forget the problem with people in Zimbabwe. They also need enough food and water as well. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. Let's turn things over now to Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第二部分第一句写到 Erratic weather patterns have left Zimbabwe's wildlife without enough resources. 不稳定的天气模式使得辛巴威的野生动物没有足够的资源。那这边要介绍 leave加受词加受词补语的句型，这表示说让或者是使什么处于某状态。那受词补语可以是分词、形容词或是介系词片语。像文中呢，它是用介系词片语 without enough resources 来当受词补语。好，那如果我们要用分词来当受词补语，这个现在分词的话是表达受词的主动状态。那如果是用过去分词，则是表达受词的被动状态。我们来看几个例句。第一个例句是 The beautiful view left us speechless. 这美景让我们说不出话来。那么这时候补语我们用到形容词 speechless。第二个例句是 I'll leave the front door unlocked. 我不会把前门锁上的。那么这时候我们用到补语是过去分词 unlocked，去表达这个前门它是没上锁的状态。好，那么第三个例句是 The news left her in complete shock. 那个消息使她震惊不已。那这时候我们用到介系词片语 in complete shock 来当补语用。好，那同样在课文第二部分，课文提到辛巴威的大象尤其受到干旱的影响。2020年的一份报告确认干旱是导致当年35只大象死亡的细菌感染背后的驱动力。文中是用 bacterial infection 来表达细菌感染。infection 就有感染、传染病的意思。那它的动词是 infect， 我们来补充它的字根。好，当我们看到 FECT 或是 FACT 或是 FICT 这一类的字根表示 do 或者是 make， 就有做啊、制作、产生、促使的意思。那在 infect 这个字当中，它的字首 in 表示在点点点之中，字根 fact表示产生。那在某个群体之中产生影响、产生作用，也许就可以联想到 infect， 它是指感染、传染，也可以去表达说情感感染了别人啊，使他人受影响的意思。我们顺便补充两个有相同字根的单字。第一个是 effect， 它的字首 ef 是来自 ex 表示向外，那字根 fect 表示产生，合在一起呢就可以表达说向外产生，像产生作用啊、影响。所以呢 effect 这个字就有效力、影响或作用的意思。它也可以当动词去表达出造成或者是使某件事发生、实现。第二个补充的是 defect， defect， 那它的字首 de 是指 down 或是 away， 它带有向下、离开的语义。那字根 fect 表示制作。同学们可以试着联想，制作出来的东西却被往下丢弃、丢开，那就表示那个东西它可能是有缺陷的啊，有问题的。所以 defect 这个字当名词，它就有瑕疵、缺陷的意思。好，那以上今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Scramble. When the earthquake hit, we scrambled to get out of the old building. Tragic. Mr. Ingram was overcome with sadness due to the tragic loss of his wife. Drought. An ongoing drought in the area has resulted in significantly reduced crop production. Progressively. Aunt Thelma's health has been progressively improving since her operation. Clash. Outside the stadium, the police stopped several clashes between fans of the two teams. Infection. Noel's infection caused a fever and headaches, leading him to make a visit to his doctor. Solar. Solar technology has been used to power everything from homes to space telescopes. Reservoir. The city relies on several reservoirs to supply clean water to its residents.
Discussion starter starts now.
Here's our discussion starter for today. The question is, what are some other examples of wildlife threatened by climate change?
One animal that's threatened by climate change is the polar bear of the North Pole. Since a lot of the ice sheets that the polar bears live and hunt on are melting away, those bears weren't designed to swim long distances. They're forced to travel further south, where there are more bears and less food.
Well, I recently read that sharks are threatened by climate change because the fish and creatures they usually eat next to coral reefs are disappearing because the coral reefs are dying off. So sharks need to find food in different places.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Mike.
I am Roger. See you next time.